Hello again. So, I've decided for my tactic videos that for the first three at least, I'm going to do three basic lists that I would take for these point costs. The first I'm going to do is 750 points. Now, the biggest thing with these low point costs, like really up to about 1250, is your HQ. We as Dark Eldar players can put a lot of points into HQ slots. For example, one time, just for shits and giggles, I made a 650 point HQ slot that took up one HQ slot, and it was 650 points. Which we can do that, especially if you take Courts of the Archon or Homunculi with more than one homunculus in the slot, which I don't do either of those things ever because it's really just a waste of points. But for these smaller ones, I would highly suggest taking a succubus. They don't cost very much, and even if they're kitted out, they really don't go over like 80 or 85 points, which the one in this list is only 75, which is really remarkable, which I love about Dark Eldar, is our HQs cost so little, but they can deal so much damage. For this succubus, all she has is right here. She has a Venom Blade, which costs 5 points. She's 65 points base. She has a Venom Blade for 5 points, and she has Haywire Grenades for 5 points. And I think the list is maybe 2 points over, which, if your opponent is not okay with that, then just take off her Haywire Grenades. But for the rest of the list, there are 2 squads of 5 Kabalite Warriors with a blaster in each squad, who are in Venoms, and each Venom has Knight Shields and an extra Splinter Cannon. The Venoms, each one costs 75 points, and each squad, including the Venom, costs 135, so both is 270 points. And then there is a squad of 9 Witches with one set of Hydra Gauntlets. They all have Haywire Grenades, and there is a Hecatrix with a Phantasm Grenade Launcher and a Venom Blade, and they are in a Raider with Knight Shields, and they are joined by the Succubus. I would suggest taking Knight Shields on a lot of our vehicles. They're not as important for Witches, because if you don't know what they do, it's when you're shooting at the vehicle with Knight Shields, it reduces the shooting range by 6 inches. So las cannons have 42-inch range, bright lances have 30-inch range, so on and so forth. And so really, you don't need them as much with the Witches because the vehicle is going to be up close to your enemy fairly quickly. And I will also go over tactics with each list, which I'll do with this after the next slot, which is fast attack. I have 7 Reavers with 2 sets of cluster caltrops. And what cluster caltrops do is they strengthen your blade veins to 1d6 strength 6 hits on the unit that they fly over. And if you want to save some points and maybe get something like just 5 more plain Kabalites, if you don't really want the cluster caltrops, you can take those off and take off, say, the Knight Shields off of the Witch Raider, and there's 50 points for another squad of Kabalites. But I like Reavers because not only do they have Skilled Rider special rule, which allows them to pass all dangerous terrain tests, which in 6th edition, when you move into difficult terrain with them, or you get on top of impassable terrain if they can get onto it, they have to take a dangerous terrain test. Any kind of skimmer has to do that in 6th edition. However, with the Skilled Rider special rule that our Reaver jet bikes have, we automatically pass all those tests. So basically, those Reavers can go anywhere they want on the board and be just fine, except from getting shot at or assaulted. And when you fly over a unit, I'm sure if you play Dark Eldar, you know how much people absolutely despise the blade veins because you're getting free hits on a unit. I've wiped entire units with only 6 Reavers before. Granted, they were not very big units, of only 5 or 10 models, but still, it's D3 hits per model, and then with those cluster caltrops, that's 2d6 strength 6 hits. And strength 6, if you fly over, which I usually do, if you fly over troops, they're most likely going to have toughness 3 or 4, so you're going to wound on a 2 up. And I don't know, I just really like Reavers because even if you only have 3 of them, they can still do damage. You can make them an anti-tank unit with a Heat Lance or a Blaster, and have them turbo boost up behind a vehicle and then shoot it and it's gone. Why I'm taking transports with such low point costs, which you really don't see happen with other armies, is really because we need transports. Because we are supposed to be a fast army, we hit fast and we hit hard, which vehicles allow us to do that. Because with new 6th edition rules especially, we love it. You can move 6 inches with your vehicle, which is normal. I'm pretty sure that's been for the past couple editions. But then now you get to disembark from your vehicle another 6 inches. So basically you have a 12-inch move when you disembark from a transport. So, and what I'm saying is you don't disembark 6 and then move 6 more, but you move the vehicle 6 and then move 6. So that, especially for witches, is beautiful because that makes their threat range a lot higher. They have a 24-inch threat range now instead of the normal 18-inch threat range if they're foot slogging. And so the idea with the witches is to deploy them as close to the front of your deployment as you possibly can. And my friend so graciously taught me a little trick that I will now bestow upon you. So you have your tape measure, which I have the Imperium tape measure, which is broken actually. It's kind of cool. I press the button to bring it back in, and that's all it does. But anyway, so say your deployment line is right here at the edge of this book. So what you do is you find a piece of cover that's fairly close to this, you hide it behind it, and because it's a skimmer, you place it sideways like this, right up along the edge, and then before your movement in 6th edition, you get a pivot. So you pivot it, and you get about an extra inch or 2 of movement. Say it's a close table like this, you move it 6 inches, and then, because it is an open-topped vehicle, it is an assault vehicle, which is great for witches. So then what you do is you measure 6 more inches from any point on the hull, which is why I love these little pointy things, because technically you can measure from those. If not, you lose an inch. You measure 6 inches, place your first witch, have them come out right behind her, and look at that. First turn, you're across the table in the enemy's deployment zone. And some people will argue that you can't do this pivot, but I looked it up in the rules. You get a pivot. You measure from the front to the front. So we'll go even 12 inches. Move that far. Whereas if you were placing it facing front, you can't have it over the deployment, so you'd have it that far back instead of right there. Which, I just love that trick. It gets me across the board fast, and that's what we want to do with Dark Eldar. And then, so then, moving on, I already talked about the Reavers. The idea with them, actually, a little bit more, is usually I don't start them on the battlefield, But in a game as small as this, I most likely would. So I would probably start them on a battlefield, hide them behind the biggest piece of cover I could find, and then just turbo boost them across the board. But if you're playing, say, I believe it's Hammer and Anvil, where you have this table edge and that table edge, then I would probably still start them in reserve. And then once your enemy moves up closer, you come in from reserve, move your 12 inches onto the board, then turbo boost up to 36 inches, and you just caught yourself a 48-inch move. And then also in 6th edition, our jet bikes, seeing as they are Eldar jet bikes, we get a free movement in the assault phase even if we have turbo boosted, which is 2d6 inches, just like you're charging something, but you don't have to get into close combat. All you do is you just roll your 2d6, move that far, which is very handy, I find, if, say, you fly over a unit and then you can't quite make it behind another piece of cover. You roll your 2d6 inches. Usually you can make it behind the cover and you're safe for next turn. Also, another thing I forgot to mention about our Reavers is the Skilled Rider special rule. It not only does those tests that I talk about and automatically passes them, but also we receive a +1 to our Jink. So that means when we turbo boost, we have a 3-up save with Reaver jet bikes, which I think is great because it's like moving 48 inches and then putting on power armor for the next turn. So moving on to the last unit, or units I should say, is the Cabalite Warriors and their Venoms. So I'm going to move these out of the way and bring these up. Now, each squad has 4 regular Cabalites and then 1 with a blaster in case a vehicle gets too close. And if it's Purge the Alien, which is the new Annihilation for those of you that are stuck in the last edition, what I usually do with them is keep them in their transports and fly them around. Sometimes I'll go tank hunting or just insta-kill something with that blaster. Usually I will send them after monstrous creatures because of all the splinter weaponry, and I'll save all the infantry for the Reavers, and then I'll go after the heavier stuff with the witches because they've handled Terminators before, not necessarily well, but they've taken some. And because of that 4-up invulse we have in close combat, we don't give a shit about Power Fists and all those AP3 and AP2 weapons. And which 4-up doesn't sound all that great, but believe it or not, it's a lot better than their usual 6-up armor, which most of the time you don't even get. And so the safest place really for them is either in their raider, moving to a close combat, or in close combat. If they're out in the open, they will get shot to ribbons. I will pay you money if you leave them out in the open for a game and they don't die. And so, back to the Cabalites though, if it is a game with objectives, with which 5 out of 6 times it will be an objective game, what you do is, when you're taking turns placing objectives, you take the objectives you have, place some in your deployment zone, as many as you can, and if you can't fit them all in your deployment zone because they have to be 12 inches away and 12 inches away from a table edge, then you place them as close as you possibly can to your deployment zone. You move your Venoms up 6 inches, deploy your Cabalite 6 inches onto an objective, and what they do for the entire game is they sit on it. Unless, of course, it's out in the open where you let your opponent have that one, and then at the end of the game you either run up your Reavers, run up your any units you have left and contest it so that they don't get it, and you'll still have units sitting on your objectives, because usually people don't place them out in the open, they place them nice behind cover so that they can sit on them, which we take advantage of. And then, really, I use the Venoms as tanks. So they're cheap and they pour out a lot of shots. which always wound on a 4-up, which is nice. So I will typically drop off my Cabalites on an objective and then move out and mow down infantry. And usually with that extra splinter cannon, they have to use the heavy 6 option, which if you don't know, splinter cannons are assault 4 or heavy 6, your choice. But if mounted on a vehicle, you have to use the heavy 6 feature. So when you have that extra splinter cannon, that's 12 shots that hit on a 3-up and wound on a 4-up no matter what. Unless you're firing with snapshots because it's stunned or shaken or something, or you're using it to shoot at something that's flying, which you usually won't because they're usually flying vehicles. But flying monstrous creatures, you can still use them to shoot at, which I usually do because it's, like I said, 12 shots, and so you have more chances of getting a 6. But really, Venoms most of the time can make up for their point cost if you use them correctly. Which also, they are fast skimmers, so they can move their full 12 inches and then fire up to 2 weapons at their full ballistic skill in 6th edition, which other vehicles can move 12 inches and fire 1 weapon at full ballistic skill. So we can move our 12 inches, and seeing as we only have 2 weapons, we can fire both of those weapons at full ballistic skill, which have a 36-inch range. So they have a very big threat range, and so they can be really useful against a lot of things. It's nice against Space Marines when you can just pour shots into them and pour in so many that they can't make their saves, or all of their saves. But it is also nice against things like Tyranids, where there's just so many of them you can't seem to mow them down fast enough. Then you send Venoms after them, and most of the times you'll probably get, because Tyranids don't really have good armor saves like us, most of the time you're probably going to kill at least 4 or 5. Which, out of 12 shots, that doesn't seem that great, but a lot of them have feel no pain as well. So that's a 5-up save. So killing 4 or 5 is usually pretty good, and that's, at least with my dice, that's how I go. So I think that about wraps up the 750 point list that I've spent 20 minutes talking about. So I will see you with the next list, which is 1,000 points. And also, quick update, I am thinking about, after I complete my Dark Eldar army, which I only have a few more things to buy, I'm going, well, I technically already have started them. I'm going to start Space Marines, just to try and mix things up from a lightly armored, very fast army to something bigger and slower, just to see if I can handle it. Which I've played a couple games and I've won one. Well, the first one I lost. The second one I won by quite a bit, and the third one I had a draw, which I was on a team with 2 other people. But enough talking, I'm going to move on to the second video, so I'll see you again soon. Thank you.